Serious, what is a punishment your parents used to do to you that at the time you thought was normal until you got older and realized it was abuse/borderline abuse? I would get in trouble for simply expressing an opinion if it was counter to what my parents thought. My dad's punishment of choice was the belt on the bare bottom. I'm female and this went on well into my teens. He'd make me take off my pants and bend over the bed. It was as humiliating as it was painful. He was also the king of gaslighting and would sometimes ignore me for weeks if I'd slighted him in some way. There were times he acted like I didn't exist and I'd have no idea what I'd done to upset him. It made me very insecure because I never knew what would upset him. Or sometimes something that I'd said that made him laugh one time would piss him off the next time I said it. So, I'd say or do things that had amused him before in a desperate attempt at gaining his approval, only to set him off and end up getting beat and or ignored. I thought all of this was fairly normal. I once told my dad I was calling the cops on him, and he so confidently told me to go ahead because they'd take his side and I'd be the one in trouble. I believed him. I thought this was how all families must be, and that it was all my fault anyway. I was horrible for making him do these things. It wasn't until I was a teen that I kind of realized not all parents acted like that. So then I just thought I had strict parents. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized what I'd endure was actual abuse. Yet, I still felt weird calling it that. The fact didn't really hit home for me until I had my own kids. Then it was like someone finally turned on the light. That's when the therapy started. My dad would punch and break things all the time. Yeah, we got belt spanked, but his anger outbursts caused me the most long-term damage. For instance, he might get mad at breakfast for something random, and then he'd just punch our TV and break it. One time he scratched his truck, so he got out and started beating up the mailbox and going crazy on it while we just sat there and watched. Holes in the walls, temper tantrums, you name it, he did it. He would also get in fights at softball games and whatever else. As an adult, I have a really bad startle reaction to any sudden noise. I don't like violence of any kind. If I see people fighting, or even animals, it causes huge anxiety in my gut. I don't spank my kids, and never will, or resort to any sudden outburst. They are amazing children, and it's proof that kids can behave without spankings. Sometimes abuse is not obvious to anyone reading. If you have an anger problem and take it out on things, get help. Even if you don't hurt your child directly, trust me, that violence is still sinking very deep into their psyches. Let's see, what else? My mom used to do this thing where she told my siblings she loved them, but would purposely not say my name. This taught me from an early age that I was damaged and not worthy to be loved. It was also very normal for my dad to call us stupid, idiots, or completely stonewall us and respond to our questions with dead silence. This was the worst. Growing up though, I just always assumed every household was like this. I have trouble even writing a lot of things on here because I always fear there's an abusive parent reading this thread to get ideas to use on their kids. I think the paranoia and sensitivity will be something I'll always carry. Edit. Thanks for the kind words, my internet friends. I'm in my 30s now and want to say that I'm thriving. In many ways, I feel my upbringing helped me become a better parent and human being in this world. The abuse is still with me in many ways because it's triggered at times, but thanks to therapy, I understand where it derives from and I can deal with it better because of this. Before counseling, I didn't understand my hurt and pain. My parents had me at age 20, so in many ways we grew up together. My mom changed completely when I got in college and became the mom I always wanted. She died about 2 years ago, but we ended up having an amazing 15 years together. She came to understand the things she did and how it impacted us. She went on to become the most incredible / loving grandmother to my kids. Meanwhile, my dad is still an adult child. He no longer breaks things, but he has emotional outbursts all the time and seems like an angry / sad person. I feel more sorry for him now that he can't find joy. I also recognize he is a product of his own upbringing. Sending love and blessings to you all, and thank you for the encouragement. Breaking my bones when I was being annoying. Destroying my things. making me cook for myself from the age of 5 and up. I didn't realize this was unusual until my therapist, just last week, told me. Withholding food, withholding water, slamming my head into walls, manipulating me into doing things I didn't want to do, laughing at me if I got hurt, and telling me to toughen up and stop with the crocodile tears. To this day the phrase crocodile tears gives me flashbacks, stopping me from sleeping for days on end, locking me in cupboards for days on end, prohibiting me from showering, ripping my hair out, cutting my hair violently with blunt scissors, isolating me to the point where I don't know basic things most people my age know. Beat and cut my twin sister if I messed up or became annoying etc. I never thought twice about it. Anytime I tried to tell another adult, they would tell me to respect my elders or to stop misbehaving or assuming I was acting like a teenage brat, even at 7, and deserved everything I got, and more. Nobody reached out to comfort me. Nobody tried to protect me. Nobody did anything. Rarely in my life have I ever experienced human kindness, and yet I'm not a sociopath. I hate to see other people in pain, and I'll always extend a hand if it won't put me at a detriment. I will be okay, even if I'm a bit traumatized and mistrusting. I'm a functional and reasonably successful young adult with a future ahead of me, and I made it all on my own. My mom had a pretty short temper and was overall unreasonable. She verbally lashed out at us, mostly my dad, over the dumbest stuff. She talked crap about us behind our backs to each other. She'd, for example, ask me why I didn't do my laundry. I'd tell her that it slipped my mind, apologize, then tell her that I'd start it right away. She would then get pissed and demand that I had remembered to do it in the first place. You can't make things right for my mom. You just let her put you down until she's satisfied. The whole if you tell the truth I won't be upset thing parents tell us is complete garbage. When I was 15, my grandparents, her parents, were struggling medically. We were the only family they had in town, so we had to take care of them. Grandpa's going senile around this time and would often respond negatively to our help. He hated doctors and wouldn't take his medicine. He was more than we could handle. We recommended an institution that could take care of them. Grandpa opposed the idea every time we brought it up. Eventually my mom got sick of it and pretty much disconnected us from them. We didn't visit them on Mother's Day or Father's Day or any other holiday for that matter. When I wanted to visit them, I had to ask my dad for permission while keeping it a secret from mom. We moved about a year later, and my mom didn't let us share our new address with anyone but close friends because she didn't want her parents to know where we went. They're still in and out of the hospital, but I don't really know how they are. You can't call out her BS. She liked incriminating others, saying we were selfish for not letting me have feelings. Put yourself in my shoes, she'd say. Because of this, dad was always on her side, defending her. She targeted most of her rage at him anyways. Kids aren't playing outside? It's his fault for being at work, rather than taking them fishing or something. Break another laptop/phone. Must mean he's being stingy and buying his wife garbage because his stuff never breaks. Straight up just not happy. Find something he's doing wrong and create an argument about it. Growing up, I thought lashing out at others for stupidity and being inconvenient was just a normal thing people did. She was a terrible example that way, and it really hurt my sister. She's constantly struggling to control her explosive emotions and frequently is depressed. Mom and dad berated her for her emotional instability, and she felt like she couldn't do anything right. She's currently fighting to become a more independent and confident adult. Personally, I noticed the ways her bad example were affecting me early on, but it's still really hard to be a better person. Everybody rants, I noticed, but when I rant, people around me get super uncomfortable. I always catch myself too late. It was really difficult to decide how I felt about my mom, because she was also genuinely loving and really cared about us. She just put herself first. I loved her, yet I hated her for the way she treated my dad. He deserved better. Every day, since I was a child, I was called animal, beast, bastard by my mother. My mom had a recurring rhetorical question. How can a mother hate her child so much? I was very rarely beaten or kicked, but when it happened it was always in public, in front of other people, as a public lecturing, and it always made me feel embarrassed for myself and my family. My mom was also very proud of all the time she spit open my lips by slapping me on the mouth with a ring of hers. "If you don't shut up I will slap you with a ring." My older sister once splattered a burning hot toasted sandwich onto my mouth, burning my lips and gums. She threatened me with doing that again for years. In parallel, my father kept reminding me that the debt collectors would come and take away everything. He had his own business, he was losing money, and he cost us everything. We became homeless. He always blamed the rest of the family for not dropping everything to support his business, which was making less than a factory laborer wage. He also reminded me regularly of how stupid I was, calling me dumb donkey on a regular basis. I used to spend a lot of my pocket money on McDonald's, for gluttony and for comfort, and he decided that my money was going on drugs, and that I was a junkie. And when I complained about this with my friends, they always laughed at me, saying I was exaggerating things, and that parents have to be hard with their children, or we would all become criminals growing up. And with all that instability, I got reminded every day that I was an animal, beast, bastard, dumb donkey, junkie. I got no recognition for my first degree. My sister never acknowledged that, or my master's degree. And when I got my PhD, she also didn't acknowledge it at all. In our last conversation I was asked to start sending them money, because I was clearly rich, and they didn't want to use their savings for their expenses. I told them I can't, they just inherited money from my dead grandpa, and I'm broke, after buying my first property, saving 70% of my salary for 8 years, and once again they told me I was useless, that everything I had done was useless, that I should quit everything, go live with them, and run errands and that, guess what, I was an animal. Beast, bastard, dumb donkey and junkie. It took me many years of therapy to understand how bad the situation was, and even today as an adult I can't even imagine what it means to grow up with a supportive family, with parents who are happy to see you, and who just love you for what you are. This form of verbal, personal intimate punishment must be definitely unusual, because I always found it almost impossible to make another person understand what I went through. When I was 15, my mom had this friend, Jojo, who offered to let us move in with her and share expenses because my mom was having a hard time making ends meet as a single mom. She was blowing her paychecks on luxuries and then not have any money for bills. I had the understanding that my brother and I would get to share a bedroom in Joe's house. I could not have been more wrong. No, my brother and I lived in an unfinished, uninsulated basement that was underneath the garage. Our beds were there, and I was able to get a couple of my posters up on the walls with that tacky green stuff. We were constantly cold. This was in Kansas City, and we had to do chores that no one else did, like chopping firewood and then stacking it just right. Because I was the eldest, I was also in charge of keeping the common areas of the house clean and picked up, vacuumed, dusted, etc. I got a job working at a Wendy's just after I turned 16, and I had to walk there from Joe's house, about 4 or 5 city blocks. I thought my mom would at least come to pick me up when my shift was over, but no, I had to walk home in the cold, in the dark, even in the rain or snow. When I got home from work, I was hungry because I had not eaten supper, so I would go into the kitchen to get something to eat, only to be told, screamed at, really, that the kitchen was closed, and if I was truly hungry, I should have eaten my dinner when it was served. When I tried to point out that I wasn't there for dinner because I was working, I was screamed at some more that I was lying, making stuff up, etc. I never even got the money from my paychecks, so I couldn't get anything to eat at Wendy's. I gave my mom my paychecks and never saw them again. I felt like Cinderella. It was awful. Used to get kicked out of the house for a relatively small sheet. There was a day I woke up late for work and was told not to come in until the next day. I spent summers doing 5/12s a week in a paint hangar, not uncommon for people to miss a day here and there because it was brutal, but policy at the time was to call in and see if they still needed you. Mom lost her sheet and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Well, you're not faking hanging around here today. Get out." I'd gotten used to the crazy at that point. I just packed a bag and had an impromptu day off. There was another day where she was trying to solve our internet problems and she was just ready to blow. She was trying to kick caffeine at the time, and silly me, I had the gall to drink a Diet Coke in front of her. She started screaming again, and when she was finished I packed a duffel and spent a couple nights at a friend's house. Her parents were well aware of the kind of things I had to put up with. She got on the weirdest faking rage trips. I remember one night, when I was still in high school, working at Subway, where she'd taken everything in my room and piled it on top of my bed, even the furniture, and screamed at me to straighten it out before I went to sleep. Some people don't think verbal abuse is a thing, but they've never been sat in a chair and screamed at and guilt tripped for hours with only a shut the fuck up and stop interrupting me if we ever tried to argue. I got spanked a few times. Only once did she really ever get more physical than that, where we'd been driving up to Tacoma to see my great grandma, who was on her deathbed, and on the way there, she'd noticed I had dirty shoes. She started screaming and slapped me when I didn't know how to calm her down. I put the pieces together later. Most of that freakout was due to the fact that she'd been recently divorced from my dad, whose family we were visiting as part of the trip, and she was afraid of looking like a bad mother because of my dirty shoes. My two stepsisters and I, and my stepdad, to a lesser extent, we were constantly terrified. So God, I'm afraid that the tiniest little thing was going to set her off. Maybe it was because nobody said thank you for a recent trip to the movies. Maybe it was because our rooms were just too filthy and started to smell. God forbid we ever did anything that we realized would actually warrant her off. We did everything we could to cover it up. We all ended up talking after we'd all moved out, just traded stories, and we realized she'd been pitting us against one another in these weird little games that she just loved to play, just to keep us all afraid. We still talk a lot, my mother and I. It's not my choice, but it's forced by proximity. I'm renting a house from family. I pretend to be on good terms, but there's nothing I'd like more than to just write her out of my life entirely. It makes me a little sad, because she does great things, and not all the time we spent together was bad, but these abuses, and so many others, just wore me down growing up, and some days it's all I can think about. This will get buried, but I was never allowed to show any emotion at all. I got punished when I was very little, 3 maybe, for crying at a film that upset me. I was sent to my room when our bird died because I got upset. I learned very quickly that crying or being upset was bad, and that if I was upset I wasn't allowed to show it because it would lead to all of the shouting, and if I was lucky, being smacked. My dad was a very shouty person with an unreasonable temper. If I forgot to tie my hair back in a bun before dinner I'd get shouted at and told he would cut it off, but wasn't allowed to show he had upset me. I thought it was completely normal, that and lack of affection. I can't remember ever having a hug from anyone in my family. It was only when I got to teenage years everyone was like, why don't you ever cry? Why don't you say I love you to your mum and dad? Why don't they say it to you? Why don't you and your mum hug? It was as I got older the lack of affection and emotion started to cause issues in relationships. I'd flinch away from hugs, and even when I was really faking upset over something it just never came out right because of not being allowed to cry or show emotion. Many therapy sessions helped, and I'm now actually quite emotional and affectionate, not with the family. I just thought it was weird when I saw other kids crying and getting a hug from a parent. I thought they were the abnormal ones. My dad used to jokingly threaten to grab me and give me a hickey, so I'd be forced to explain to my boyfriend where I got it. I don't think he realized that would have backfired on him spectacularly. Boyfriend would have called CPS. In retrospect, that might have been the best thing. I was forced to go to church, participate in everything. Every dance, every meeting, every fundraiser, every activity. Sometimes, that was used as punishment. One punishment he used was to make us read a chapter in the Bible and write a book report on it. I look back and now see that as religious abuse. This one time, my sister wanted to get concert tickets and I desperately wanted to go. I was about 14. She would have been old enough to drive us. He'd let us go to concerts before, but this time, the show was on a school night. He made a deal that I had to make sure my room was clean before I left, b. make sure all my homework was done before I left, and c. no matter what time we got in, I had to get up and go to school the next day. I was cool with all of that, so my sister bought the tickets. Fast forward to the day of the show. I get home from school and clean my room, whip through my homework. Dad waves us off. We have a great time at the show. Can't remember who it was. When I got home, ears still ringing, I found my room completely trashed. Every drawer yanked open and contents dumped wherever. Mattresses pulled off the twin beds, sheets strewn everywhere. Closed door flung open, and every single thing in it just thrown around wherever. It looked like a tornado had literally hit my room. We just stood there, in shock. My sister whispered, "What did you do?" I had no idea. I had upheld all three parts of my end of the bargain. She asked if I wanted help putting my room back together. I told her no, because I was pretty sure I was expected to put it all back by myself, and I knew I'd just be murdered if I didn't do it before I went to bed. If my room still looked like that when I got home from school the next day, I knew there would be hell to pay. So I stayed up until 3 AM putting my room back in order. Got about 3 to 4 hours of sleep, and went to school on time the next day, as required. It was never discussed. I still don't know what I did wrong. I still have no idea what lesson he was trying to teach me. All I learned was that my dad is inconsistent and capricious and vindictive AF. And he cannot be trusted to keep an agreement. He will turn on me and treat me like shit for no reason. Good job, Dad. I'm not going to say I thought that was necessarily normal. Even then, I realized this was a faked up thing to do. But it wasn't until I got older that I realized that all of Dad's parenting choices pretty much amounted to abuse. My parents had me kind of young, at 20, and completely weren't ready for parenthood. My dad had a lot of anger issues and would spank me for talking back, or if I did anything wrong, sometimes so hard I wouldn't be able to sit for an hour at least. Sometimes he would scream in my face. He never hit me, but I was always scared that someday he would when screaming wasn't enough. There was one time in elementary school where I got a D in library for some dumb reason and I ran home crying to my mom and hiding under her covers because I was terrified of what my dad's reaction would be. I remember him making me stand with my nose to the door with a dollar or a card between my nose and the door for timeout, and if the dollar dropped then my time would start all over again. My mom would make fun of or criticize anything I liked to do, like drawing or writing. She also jokes around about any flaws you have, taking it way too far to where it really hurts, and it definitely left my self-esteem in pieces. But if you told her she did something that upset you, she would cry and say that she's a horrible mother and make you feel really guilty about it. Or deny it completely. She would also wash my mouth out with soap all the time if I swore, which I learned from Dad screaming at me. Her mom has a lot of mental issues and smothered her with love growing up, so mom told me that growing up she tried not to love me. She still denies saying that. Another favorite thing of hers would be to berate me on what I wore or how I acted because it reflects directly on me. And that shit was hammered so deep into my brain that I unconsciously get pissed at my boyfriend sometimes for the same reason and have to stop myself from not letting him be himself. My parents would also come to me if they were having problems with each other. Dad would bitch about mom. Mom would cry about dad. They would get into screaming matches that would last for a couple hours. There were times I hid with my brother under the table during them, comforting him because he thought they would hurt each other. I got in the middle of their fights a lot because I knew it was scary to be screamed at by dad, or because I knew mom would twist your words against you. They always got pissed at me for it, but all I knew was I wanted the fighting to stop and I didn't want anyone getting hurt. I was a stubborn kid and could be a brat at times, so those punishments didn't teach me anything other than to not trust my parents and to keep everything to myself. All those things individually would have been fine, but I'm pretty sure growing up in that environment gave me depression and anxiety and major self-esteem issues. My stepmother would freak out at the slightest inconvenience or typical teenage moment and curse me out for hours, saying I was playing mind games with her and that I was just like my mother. Ended with her screaming at me until I cried and eventually got away from her. Then when I actually needed emotional support, she would minimize me pain and then convert the conversation to her problems. She missed my college graduation because of drama between my paternal grandmother and my dad that she could have dealt with another day, and then showed up at my apartment high and drunk as fuck, talking about her problems for over an hour. I got fed up once I had realized I missed my lunch reservation and sent her home. I missed having lunch with my dad because my paternal grandma wanted to be taken home due to drama between stepmother. Stepmother would also blame us for shit that wasn't our fault, beat the shit out if her own daughter and belittle her, and call us beaches all the time. She also downplays depression/anxiety/mental health as making shit up and demonic presence. She literally said to me once that my depression was just the devil in you. My dad would emotionally torment my middle sister about being fat and being like her father. Middle sister still gets tormented for being a loser, not good enough, stoner, etc. Now the youngest sister gets a lot of the flack for being a beach. Basically anything and everything. No one could accuse my parents of spoiling me or being a helicopter parent. When I faked up, they got angry at me and not the person. There was no being on my side no matter what, only if I really was the victim in that situation. But sometimes they just went overboard with their tough love. One time when I was about 13 or 14 years old, I went outside to play with my friends. I hadn't realized I forgot to close the window all the way. So my mother called me on my cell phone, the first one I ever owned, and told me thanks to my actions, someone had broken into our house and stolen all our stuff and the insurance wouldn't cover it, since I had forgotten to close the window all the way. I was in a complete panic. I even considered not going home at all. Eventually I went back, in tears and afraid of what they'd do to me and how I'd get punished for it, and it was all a hoax. Nothing had happened. I broke down sobbing, and my parents thought they had taught me a valuable lesson. Instead, I developed some sort of compulsion that had me check every little thing multiple times before I left the house, and I was paranoid about locking doors and windows for years. What bothers me to this day is that I can't really talk to my parents about anything without being told what to do and lectured about how all my plans aren't well thought through and not practical. Every time I have to make a decision about my life, I'm advised to not risk anything, to wait, to do the exact opposite. I'm constantly told everything is so much more hard and serious than I thought and I'm naive. For example, I've wanted to buy a car for years and my parents have managed time and time again to persuade me not to do it. It's much more expensive than you think. What if you lose your job? You'll need to take lessons again before buying a car. Don't buy a cheap, used one. Save more money so you can afford a nice one. This has been going on for at least 5+ years. When my parents were my age, they had 2 little kids, 2 cars and bought a house. I'm 33 and apparently I'm not adult enough to handle my finances and get a car. Despite having a job that pays decently, they advised me against the courses I took at uni. Actually, they wanted me to get a job at a bank after school, a couple of years before the financial crisis hit. They advised me against moving away, to take a good career opportunity. The strangest thing is that I have a younger sister and they are never like this when they are talking to her. Her career choice wasn't questioned. They helped her get her first car at 18. They never advise her not to make a choice she wants to make. I don't get it. I just can't figure out why they treat us so differently. My ma always used to threaten me that she would abandon me when I was young. Then one day she dropped me off at this Saturday night school she had me in and didn't pick me up. I cried the whole time I was in school that night. There was this one girl who made fun by bullying me all the time. Even she would ask if I was okay and got the teacher's attention for me. The night school was ending and I start to feel genuine panic in my stomach as the school starts to empty out. Their parents were here and all the kids were going back home and desperation. I had to ask a nun I had only seen around. School was also a church if she would drive me home. I think the nun called my mom. I could hear my mom still mad af through the phone. My mom chose not to come pick me up, even when a school supervisor said otherwise. What happened next is still a blur, but I'm sitting in the car with this person, the nun bless her heart, who I did not know, in a location I did not recognize, at night. It is so quiet, and I'm scared I might not be able to get back home. I didn't know all the directions to get back home, so I don't even know how I got back home that night. I also remember the nun had a very kind face. Pretty sure my mom stopped taking me to that night school soon after. Pretty sure that faked me up, and I definitely still hold resentment. Mum yelling at us, often drunk or on some pills or high. Once she came in cross-faded and told me I was ruining my life. Dad coming home, walking up to me, and just starting to punch the crap out of me. Half the time I didn't know what the hell I'd done. Mum never stopped him. The one time he went after my younger brother she intervened. Sometimes she would call him, and he would come home steaming at me and just go to town. Dad playing the daily game of jabbing me as hard as he could in the ribs or fire at a nerve point to see how badly I would flinch. Used to make him laugh. That was our bonding ritual. Every freaking week. Taking the artwork I had done that year and burning it as it was considered clutter during spring cleaning. Having my new kitten put down without letting me say goodbye. Just coming home and finding out he was ill and gone. Telling me I was breaking the bank getting a few sessions of therapy, not even close. Being told my therapist was pandering to me. Being told by both parents that I make their lives hard and that's the reason they're getting a divorce. They worked through it, but they fought all the time. Trying to practice my cello and being told to shut the fuck up most days. Not being able to pick what's on television most of the time as it was whatever my mother wanted to watch. Mostly endless shows of how families murdered each other. Being yelled at each time I tried to bring someone over. How it was always a pain in the ass. I basically stayed in my locked room for the first 20 years of my life because it was the safest place to be, except the time Dad came in and kicked a hole in my wall because I wasn't doing well at school. Then it didn't feel safe either, except to eat dinner and watch television for a bit. Other than going to school, where I was bullied and socially inept, I didn't get much exposure to the world other than through books, eventually a TV in my room, and a computer. The thing is I love my family. A bit late to the party, but I had my fair share of abuse both physical and mental. In Middle Eastern culture punishing your kids is not only accepted but encouraged, so they'd do it at school too. If you were bad at school they'd beat you over your open palms with a ruler, multiple times. At home if I was not doing homework or being lazy, actually depressive and not motivated, I would get called useless, a failure, a disappointment, and my parents would tell each other how all the bad traits I had were from each other, and would loudly argue in front of me saying he's such a piece of shit cause of you and so on. I only got $1 for lunch in my entire day at school from first grade, which was okay, till I finished school, which obviously wasn't. I was always shy, because if I said something stupid I would be berated at home for it. One time I pissed off my dad somehow, and he threw a metal chair at me. I dodged it by hiding behind the door, which had a glass panel, and obviously the glass broke, so I got beaten for breaking the glass. Favorite weapon was the hose from the washing machine. I was always short as a kid, under 5 feet till the age of 16 to 17. Where I eventually grew to 5 minutes and 10 seconds, and I'm taller than my father now, which is when the beatings stopped, because after he had hit my mother for some reason, I busted into the room, pushed him over the couch, and told him I will kill him if he ever touches my mom, but continued to call me useless and so on. I still avoid calling it abuse to this day out of pity for them, as I was born when both of them were around 40 and both have mental health issues, which I'm afraid to inherit. Still have issues socializing because of this, but I'm working on getting better now. Sorry for the long rant, but I feel like there are others like me which refuse to acknowledge the fact that it was actual abuse and find excuses for their parents, and I had to give my side of the story. My dad and my mom both used to whip my behind with a belt and a firewire. It got pretty violent and everyone got hit with something when they were a kid in my family. So we all assume that it was normal until we learned that kids are not allowed to be spanked. Of course there are numerous of qualifications in the Texas state law. If a child does get spanked, they can only apply on the buttocks, but not the thigh, nor back, nor anywhere else. A child must be hit with a belt or a wooden paddle, and it must equal bruising. There are 3 strikes to every social worker visit to a family. Sadly mine had to get 2 due to my own big mouth and someone blabbed to a social worker, even though I'm talking to a counselor who I thought did the whole confidentiality. And another because one whipping session with a firewire striked me on my arm, including a large scar, and I can sometimes feel it when I got older. So in retrospect of everything, let's come to a conclusion. I still talk to my parents, and I still love them. I forgave what happened back then, because I was a little faking sheet who was very undisciplined. It's not an excuse to beat me, but it does go into that gray area of what can I do to really discipline my kid. At some point of my life, I just got tired of causing trouble and getting beat and going to the office after 3 near panic attacks of me going to get my ass beat. So yeah, I forgave my mom and my dad, and I understood that they are from another time entirely. However, I won't do this to my kids. Never. I will be better as a father and a husband, and understand that kids are undisciplined, and I was one as well. Everything came with a price. When I asked to do something, like sleep over a friend's house, he'd literally ask what he could get out of it. I'd have stuff pre-arranged and agreed upon, but he'd still say, make sure to do X before you go, when X wasn't my responsibility, and not something I'd said I'd do. He'd bring it up after 2, like, I'll let you do X last week so now you have to do Y. It sometimes was necessary things, like school supplies, or things I had to participate in to be well-rounded. I started really hating dance class, and never really wanted to do it, but my sister already was, so it was easier. It was always for stuff I wanted to do or get though. Nothing was ever given without a price. It peaked when I had a suicidal episode, was taken to the emergency room, and the next time I had a fight with my dad, and wasn't suicidal at all. It was over some chore or something. He told me that insurance might not cover the previous trip to the emergency room, so I'll owe him for that, and next time, he won't even bother. He continued after that, and even still does it, but obviously that was the worst, and I eventually got to the point where I realized how manipulative it was. I still sort of expect to others though, and have a lot of doubts about my worth and always offer people something when they do generally nice things for me, and feel really nervous when they don't take it, waiting for them to collect the debt I owe. My mom used to insult me in a very horrible way. Actually I still can't pronounce the words she used even in front of my therapist in my mother tongue, French, well-known gross language, cause it'll break me. One day, I forgot to lock with the key our back door. She got totally hysteric, regular thing, cause at the time there was 2 robbery in the village the same month. She basically said that she's gonna prostitute me to pedophiles for a founding if a burglar break into, and she start to describe in a very full of imagery way with awful words what they gonna do to me. I was a small 13-year-old bullied at school child who did not speak and did never leave the house. I was used to that kind of abuse. When I was a little younger, maybe 10-year-old or less, I accidentally locked up and couldn't lock back my wardrobe, big old rich thing in a noble wood. So I came like, mommy I'm sorry I need help, I can't get my clothes. It was in the morning, I was in my pajamas, and she got so mad she slapped me and forced me to undress and stayed naked as long as the wardrobe stay locked up. I run hiding in my little brother's bedroom. He was a toddler. The worst part was when a friend of my parents, who was at ours for some reason, came with her in my brother's bed for examine at the wardrobe mechanism for unlock mine, and see me naked rolled up into a crying ball in one tiny corner, and fortunately just pinch his lips, and acting like he doesn't see anything. He could have been a pedophile or some shit, but years later, I'm 21-year-old now, he's a good friend of mine. I read the true crime serial killer book Everything She Ever Wanted by Anne Rule, and felt like I was reading my mom's autobiography. The abuse, manipulation, and sympathy tactics, minus the murders, at least to my knowledge, were the story of my childhood. My mother used to spend hours talking on the phone about how horrible I and my siblings were, and going into great detail about what a saint she is putting up with these miserable pieces of shit. She defends herself years later that she wasn't harming our reputation in the least, since there was no one on the other end of the line. Oh, and abandoning us with random people for years at a time. I'm guessing she picked us back up, only to regain the sympathy of whoever believed the sacrifice she had to make to raise us. Or maybe she had pressure from her church as she was a very devout hypocrite. We were good normal kids who raised and loved each other when no one else did. It seemed normal at the time. I have kids now, and thinking about her verbal and physical abuse and neglect, I don't even know how this is possible without some exterior drug factor. Mental illness plus narcissism is scary. I shared the book recommendation with some of my siblings. I have many. The sympathy runs dry if they are all grown and gone, so she had a steady stream. They got a kick out of it. No, Beach. I'm not going to call you more often to hear your pity stories about how life in assisted living is treating you. Just let your miserable light go out already. A friend made an anonymous statement to the school guidance counselor that I was suicidal, so I had to be enrolled with a psychiatrist before being allowed to return to school. My mom wailed and screamed at me for doing this to her and then refused to put me on any medication for depression/anxiety because that would make me look like I failed as a parent. After over a decade of pure unwillingness and emptiness with my only primary emotion manifesting in rage unexpectedly, I realized oh what no, this isn't right, saw a doctor and found the right medication for me after a few tries. Also she would go through these really weird episodes, is all I can call them. She was a cleaning fanatic, like would lock herself in each bathroom and bleach from floor to ceiling once a week. She would steam clean every other day and vacuum daily. This was all fine, like who is gonna complain about a clean house? But she would randomly go in my room and take everything in the room and put it on my bed. Anything on my desk, on the bed. CDs from the entertainment center, on the bed. Lava lamp, the bed. All the clothes from the dresser, on the bed. Jewelry, on the bed. Every single item in my room aside from furniture would be put on my bed and I'd have to just put it all back. Sometimes she would rearrange the furniture and I'd have to put all that back as well. It was really annoying whenever it happened, but she always said it was for my own good. One thing my parents did that always faked with my head growing up was whenever they would get into an argument, they would scream the most obscene insults at each other throughout the house. When they got tired of yelling at each other, they would come to me and my brother's room and yell at us and tell us they don't love each other anymore and they are going to get a divorce over some shit my brother or me forgot to do. I can still remember crying on my school bus and all the other kids laughing at me because my dad told me he was going to divorce my mom because I didn't take out the trash before school. This also created a rift between my brother and I for a bit because we would think our parents were going to split up because of a chore one of us forgot to do. My dad has later realized this was faked up and apologized for it to my brother and I. My mom still just cries and plays victim all the time. She's a hard woman to talk to. My mother used to also hit my brother and I in the face when she was upset with us, whether it be because we didn't do a chore, got a bad grade in school, or because she thought we smarted off to her or something. I got out of there when I was 18. My brother sadly stayed in it until he was 20, and he is 5 years younger than me, so he's 7 years of that bullshit without me there, and I feel he got the worst of it. He's doing great now though. He's going to school to become an RN, and he turned my shed to a dope apartment and is living out there. Sadly, we are still neighbors to the folks, but my dad has become super chill now, and we all get along great with him. Not so much my mom. I can't listen to her talk even if I tried. My mom used to tell me she hated me, wished I was never born, I was useless, I was hopeless, I was a waste, would make fun of me, and generally be a horrible person to me. I had undiagnosed bipolar disorder that began to manifest in my early teens, and she would accuse me of being on drugs because I'd be suicidal and not put my schoolwork as a priority. I was horribly depressed, and my home life was a nightmare. So of course, that meant I must be on drugs. I would come home from school to find my bedroom totally ripped apart, mattress flipped over, drawers ripped out, and my shot just dumped everywhere because they were looking for drugs that didn't exist. Then my stepfather would walk in and say, "Your room is a mess. Pick it up." In a really shoddy tone. I got a progress report once from school, and as soon as I walked in the door my mom full on attacked me. When she had me by the hair and started bashing my head into the iron radiator, I started to be afraid and fought back. I managed to push her off me and she hit the small of her back on the doorknob. Then she kicked me out and I had nowhere to go in a snowstorm wearing a hoodie and sneakers. My forehead was bleeding and I had scratches all over my face. I'll never forget how the blood in my hair froze into like deadlocks. There are a lot more, but I'd be here all day. Lol. On 2 separate occasions, once when I was 8 and once when I was 10, I was in trouble with my father for not cleaning my room. He would yell and scream and throw stuff, and it would make me so angry that I would just sit in my room and read instead of cleaning. Maybe a dumbass move from me, but whatever. My room was never really that dirty anyway, because I didn't play with toys by that age. I just read and played computer games. One day he comes home from work, tells me that until my room is clean, I'm not allowed to eat anything but toast for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I figured he was trying to psych me out or something, but 4 days and he hadn't relented, and I was so tired and hungry I was falling asleep in school. I was already a pretty skinny underweight kid naturally. My mom was sneaking me food when she could, but he was always around. Anyway, my room was never cleaned to his standards, but one day I just sat down to dinner and ate, and he didn't say anything. Guess he was scared of me telling a teacher or something. On another occasion he locked me out of my bedroom and made me sleep in the hallway on the floor, but that ended 2 nights in because it made the dog excited and she would bark all night. I guess none of this sounds bad compared to some of the other stories, but it, along with many other factors, seriously damaged my relationship with him, and now, over a decade later, I only speak to him when there's no way out of it and never go home to see him. Honestly, reading everyone's comments here makes me feel better. Not because reading horrible abuse stories is a great pastime, but because it makes me feel a little less alone. This is exactly why I started a new Reddit account, just so I can discuss things I can't really talk about with anyone other than myself. My stepfather was a drunk asshole, and I knew at any point during the day I was bound to get a major beatdown. When it was time to receive these as whoopings, he would make my brother, mom, and 2 sisters sit on the couch to watch. I always had to drop my pants and panties and bend over the living room table, which happened to be very low to the ground, so everything was very exposed. He often used a leather belt and always gave me more licks if I moved my hands. It was more than humiliating. Other times, if he was too drunk to stand, he would make me lay across his lap. This was every day for years. I didn't understand I was being abused. I just thought I got my ass beat a lot because I was bad. The worst as whooping was with a vacuum cleaner cord. It was by far the most painful. He lost his temper while I was in the laundry room and he grabbed the closest thing to him. The sting of that thing is unforgettable. I've managed to understand and accept the effects of the physical abuse the older I get, but the psychological abuse still haunts me. One thing I can never get over is that mother faker pawning my trombone. I was first chair in concert band all through middle school and was just starting high school. It was literally the only thing I was proud of. I was good at it, and I knew I had a future. I don't even remember the reason, but he made me tell my band director I was quitting. It breaks my heart to this day, and I'm 35 years old. Anyways, that's just one example. Sounds silly, being so sour over a damn band instrument. I eventually ended up a ward of the state, bouncing from YDC to a group home where I graduated high school. Looking back on it all, it feels like I survived a war. If anyone is curious, I have a decent relationship with my mother. She is still married to him. Well, there was the fact that she would study with me, which really only entailed her making me read for 10 minutes and quizzing me on it. If I got it wrong or couldn't remember it, she'd tear me a new one and make me go back. Obviously, this stressed me out and made me forget even more, which made her yell at me more, which stressed me out more, and ad infinitum, until it was late at night and I cried myself to sleep. Rinse and repeat from 6th grade until 10th, when I finally stopped caring. Which is kinda the ending to my next example. My mom would physically discipline me. Maybe it'd be the chancler or a belt, but more often than not, it was a coat hanger, because that's what she had nearby. Which was, you know, whatever. A lot of parents physically spank their children. But what made me absolutely terrified was how angry she'd get. Clenched teeth, a growling shout, veins popping, the works. As a kid and young teenager, I was absolutely terrified of her. Because it didn't matter whether or not I did anything. She'd just take out her bad day on me. If she had a bad day and came home, all I'd have to do is say hi, and she'd get pissed off at me. I stopped being scared of her when I got to 10th grade, because that's when I realized two things. First of all, she could never ever hit me. Because if she did, a single report to CPS, and she'd lose her job. You know, since she faking worked for the department. She never hit me once she started working there, but she still threatened to. So once I realized that she couldn't follow through without losing her job, I stopped being scared. The second thing is that I realized that, even though I'm a small guy, I'm much bigger than her. I'd never hit her, but if she tried to hit me, I'd easily be able to restrain her. Thankfully none of that very became necessary. We have a pretty good relationship today, and I don't think she remembers or realizes that what she used to do was borderline abusive. My mom used to beat the living shit out of me when I did something bad in school. Whatever object is in her reach, guarantee she'll hit me with it. When she's tutoring me at home, she'll slap my face when I couldn't solve the problem fast enough, or when I get it wrong. Mostly, it's about school and my grades. I mean, I don't fail my subjects, but when my grades aren't up to her standards, my ass gets beat when I get home. I have this memory of her locking me in the bathroom, threw all my books and notebooks in there, and she threatened to burn me alive with lit match in hand. I was shouting and crying my eyes out. I never remembered what caused her to do that. The worst memory I have is when I had low grades in this test paper. When my mom saw it, I got the belt. I think it was my own belt that she used. I had lashes on my forearms because I tried to block each hit. The next day, I returned the test paper with my parents' signature. Test papers were brought home, and the parent needed to sign it as proof that they saw it. My teacher saw my lashes and asked about it. I remember answering that my mom got angry. Teacher said, "But you still passed?" To which I just shrugged my shoulders. I saw that feeling bad for me look in her eyes. As a disclaimer, I know my mom seems like a bad person, but she isn't. I never asked her about it. My dad went out of the country to get a better paying job, so I guess all her frustration from not being with her husband got the best of her. She never said sorry for all of what I've been through, and I'm fine with that. I used to resent her and my siblings for it. My siblings never got the type of upbringing that I got, but I made peace with it. My therapist has recommended that I read Homecoming by John Bradshaw. I've only made it to chapter 2, but it is amazing so far. The book deals with understanding how various traumas or needs not met as children affect us as adults, and healing from those events to stop those negative effects. I purchased a used copy on eBay for less than $5. I cannot recommend this book enough. As for things that occurred when I was a child that I didn't realize were abnormal or potentially harmful, when I was about 7 years old my mom continually told me that all men want is sex. We had already had the talk explaining sex. She was in a bad place emotionally and allowed her own issues with men to cause her to vent her emotions to me. When I had little crushes on boys at school and they didn't feel the same because they were still in the stages of girls have cooties etc. I felt it was because I wasn't good enough. As a teenager, since I was not wanted sexually by boys at school, I internalized that as me not even being good enough to just be used for sex. When I was 17 and finally lost my virginity, I had only known the guy for about 8 hours. I was desperate to lose my virginity so I could feel that I was at least good enough to be used for sex. My grandma who I lived with had lupus, so she was in a lot of pain. Whenever I would want normal things like wanting friends to come over to play, I was raised as an only child, she would say that I was trying to kill her. This was 100% not in a joking way. She said she had one foot in the grave and I was trying to put the other one in too. She would say that I wanted her to die, and if she died it would be my fault. Kinda thought verbal abuse and insults were not a big of deal. Beatings too, not like a slap on the cheek. Beatings. Oh, and I guess the threat of killing oneself for anything. Emotional blackmail really affected me in a bad way, and I kinda do it too now. Thanks mom. I remember one time I was really in a bad shape and I could not for the life of me understand why. So I think I was like 10 or 12. My mom was out, I was watching television and a show about disabled kids was on. It's called Telethon in France. Well, they give you a number to make a donation. So I grab a picture I drew her a while back. I think I drew a girl or something. And I note down the number in case we would want to donate later when the show is over. I go to sleep. Woke up to her screaming. Don't understand, began to cry. She tells me it brings bad luck to write a number for disabled people on something of hers. I guess she thought she or I would become disabled. Anyway, I remember her beating me with a leather boot. The heel hurt like hell, I remember that. And yelling at me for like 2 hours. After she's done, she tells me kneel and pray to God to undo what you did and stay there all night. I spent 5 hours kneeling. She would throw her shoe at me if she saw me kneeling on my butt and not on my knees. I don't know how to explain, but it hurt, and I had pains in my thighs and knees for a few days, and crying the next morning. She made me apologize, and we went on like nothing happened. I refuse the verbal abuse, so I don't call or see her. She can no longer hurts me, so I'm not afraid of her, but her words still hurt lol, which sucks because despite all this I miss her. God, I hope I'll be a better mother. A little late to the party, but I'll chime in anyway. I didn't even realize these behaviors were abusive until my 20s, and I actually talked to other people and verbalized what happened out loud. It didn't really start until I was 12 to 14, but when it started it was very bad. Growing up I always noticed my parents favored my brother, but I could never really figure out why. When I started middle school my dad began physically disciplining me more often. One day while closing a sliding glass door and the porch was wet, I closed the door too hard for his liking, and he came flying outside and smacked me across the face hard enough to drop me to the ground. After that I think he just thought it was okay, I guess. Like had done it once, and my mother was not only okay with it, but supported it, so why not keeping doing it? Starting freshman year, due to my home life and bullying at school, my grades started slipping, and every day I had less than a C in any given class or any missing assignments he gave me the belt. Only the condition was he would do it until I screamed, and if he thought I screamed too soon to get out of it, he would keep going until he felt I learned my lesson. Many nights I would go to bed with my lower back / thighs so sore that I would have to lay on my stomach. That was really the worst of it. Without getting too much on my soapbox, there was a lot of other stuff, but I don't want this to turn into my life story. At one point my dad grounded me until my grades improved. To be fair, I had been, up to this point, protesting him and getting bad grades intentionally. He'd lost his sheet and smashed my room when I got my first C in the 7th grade. 2 years later, and my grades had continued to decrease to mostly C's with a few B's. So I'm grounded. Grounded means I come home from school, I do my chores, then I go to bed. I get up from bed to cook and eat dinner, then I return to bed, wake up, go to school, repeat. Weekends are spent in bed. It's sort of hard for grades to improve, not that I wanted them to, when you're not allowed to get out of bed to read or do homework. My grades got worse. My dad got angrier. I now had to eat my dinner while sitting on a bucket in the kitchen so that I couldn't hear the TV. I had more chores. I slept 14-ish hours per day, more on weekends. This went on for about 18 months. I got kicked out of the good high school and downgraded to a school that was beyond easy. I literally received a half credit, as in you only need 230 credits to graduate from high school credit, from a teacher in exchange for a stick of gum at one point. My grades immediately became A+ equivalent, and I was freed from my punishment. I went from being 15 credits behind to graduating a year early. I thought this was what being grounded was for everyone. Took me a while to realize that 18 months is excessive and that being confined to bed for the majority of it was above and beyond what most people experienced. My parents never beat me or locked me in my room or anything like that. My dad never punished us at all, unless he was egged on by my mother, and even then it was pretty half-hearted. My mother's abuse was more insidious. Rarely physical, though I remember one time I was spending too long in the shower one morning, so she burst into the bathroom and slapped me so hard it left a handprint. Instead she'd remind me how much better I had it than children in other families, tell me how in other families I'd be belted, or smacked around for whatever problem I'd caused, or mistake I'd made. She made it clear that that's what she wanted to do, and how lucky I was that she wouldn't, because she was better than other parents. I lived in terror of the days she'd snap and slap me, or, one time, wrench my head around by the hair so hard I have a lasting injury to the tendons in my neck. But most of the time it was verbal. She'd choose something about me and pick till I believed it about myself. She always waited till quiet moments to start picking. She'd sidle up to me at a family party and sniff, then say, "Are your clothes wet? You smell musty. Like your clothes didn't dry properly." She knew full well whether my clothes had dried properly or not, because she was the one who did the washing. She'd then say, "Is it ick now, downstairs? Have you washed yourself properly?" She even went as far as taking me to the doctor when I was 14 and making them believe I had a yeast infection, so they gave me suppositories. For those that don't know, they're a waxy tampon-shaped block that I had to put inside myself every night for a week. They melted at body temperature, so not only did I have to deal with the discomfort of insertion, I also woke up every morning with the feeling that I'd pissed myself because it had all melted and run back out during the night. It was disgusting and only succeeded in making me feel dirty and ashamed about my body and my natural odor. Whenever I tried to defend myself, we'd get into an argument. I'd get upset and she'd act the victim who was only trying to help. I'd spend the rest of the night miserable and sitting down with my legs crossed, terrified someone else would smell me. There's plenty more, but that's the one which is stuck in my mind the most because I still have a complex about it. I can't go on a night out without worrying if I'm clean, if I showered properly before going out, if anyone else can smell me. I know there's no basis to it, because I've literally asked people to sniff, and they haven't smelled anything. So thanks, Mum. You faked me up in the head for no reason at all. When I use the phone too much, my mom would say, "Hey goat, come here, look at this," or something similar, and then backhand me across the face when I came into the room and say, "Get off the mother faking phone." She didn't ever have a call to make, and I always had my homework and chores done, so it's not like I was screwing off. She would give me permission to go to someone's house and then scream at me for actually going. I built a computer and used my dad's dial-up login. She was okay with it till she found out I was using it to talk to my friends at school on AIM, so she would randomly have the phone disconnected every few months just to screw with me. She never let me have friends over. In high school I realized that she wasn't psychic, and if I lied and told her I was walking the dog, I could go hang out with a couple of friends who lived within a mile or two and not raise any eyebrows. Of course I got caught, and I ran off and hid out at the library. She was on the phone with the cops when my friend dropped me off down the block. God knows if she knew I'd had help, he would have probably gotten arrested. I have a much less hideous relationship with my mom now that I haven't seen her face to face in years. If you want to make sure your kids don't live with you forever, torture them psychologically for trying to live without you. Guaranteed you'll never see them again past age 20. This is not quite as bad as everyone else's, but it definitely falls into emotional abuse. I was having trouble finding the motivation to do homework when I was an elementary schooler. My parents had talked with my teachers, tried getting me after school help, and even had me tested for something at a local university, and yet I would not do my homework. Mostly it was sheer boredom. I was doing great on the tests, so why do I need to practice something I already aced? Finally in 5th grade my dad had enough. He started grounding me from things every time I brought home a weekly progress report that said I hadn't done my homework. It started basic enough, not being able to leave the house to see friends, then included the telephone, then video games, then TV, then magazines, then books, then free movement around the house. Basically by the end, just before my dad gave up, I was only allowed to come home and sit in the corner doing homework until my dad came home. If it wasn't done, when he got home I had to do squat thrusts. Then I went back to sitting in the corner until bed. That last phase lasted a few weeks. TV was the hardest, because we ate with the TV on. That meant I had to eat dinner alone in a separate room for almost 2 months, where I could hear them talking and laughing in the other room. Threatening to leave and abandon us whenever we did something wrong from both my parents. It literally destroyed my ability to feel secure in my relationships. It's better with my boyfriend, because we can try to work on things, but I haven't admitted to him that. I think he knows on some level though. My dad is the worst of both my parents. The only reason he never seriously hit us was because my mum threatened calling the police after he hit her. My sister and I both quickly learned to avoid getting hit as he did get past her, or we misbehaved and deserved it. I remember after a big fight, when I was 12ish, I broke down crying and ran off because he said he never wished he met my mother, and my mind took it as he didn't want us either. I didn't run far because I was too scared of him hurting me. Turns out, despite his apologies, I later learned that was right and he does wish we weren't born. Then recently, we got into a fight that scared me so bad I thought he was going to beat the fuck out of me. I'm pretty sure he would have, if it weren't for someone pulling into the area. Imagine a 220-pound 23-year-old in fetal position. Hell, I know he would have. I'm pretty sure he has hit my sister and I just tuned it out and excused it as we deserved it. Being terrified of him that night made me realize it. My mom used to slap me a lot when I misbehaved. I have 2 very vivid memories of her slapping me, but I'll only talk about one. When I was younger, we had a computer that was kept in my parents' room. I used to play a lot of games on it growing up, such as Mario Kart on SNES emulator. Well, one morning I asked my mom if I could play on the computer while she still slept. She said yes, so long as I keep the volume down. I kept it pretty low, but I guess some of the noises annoyed her because she would keep yelling at me to turn it down. After a while she got annoyed with me and yelled for me to get off. I got sad and cried and sat in the living room. My mom then calmly came into the living room, sat next to me, and slapped me about 10 times really hard across my face. She did that till, I guess, she got her anger out, then fell back asleep. I thought it was normal, and I used to slap my dolls and stuff whenever I'd pretend they were misbehaving. She also used to berate me and make me stand in front of her while she yelled at me for misbehaving. If I'd lie or get in trouble at school or something, I'd stand in the living room while she called me names such as stupid, retarded, asshole, bitch, etc., and I didn't ever really say anything. To which she would reply, "Why aren't you saying anything? Did you become deaf or something?" My mom was, and still is, pretty abusive, and it didn't take until I was about 18 to realize. So I've always put up with some kind of abuse, but things really picked up when I neared my teens. Mom could not handle having an older child. Little kids were cute and easy to control, but teens were neither children nor adults, and she had no patience for that clumsy in between, at least not for me. Her oldest, she began to make fun of me for things that I couldn't control. I was clumsy. I have a congenital warp in my hip joint and weak ankles, both of which she'd been aware of since I was very small. I was quiet and bookish, Asperger's, also something she knew and did not seek help for, by the way. I was a liar. The truth didn't set you free in our house, especially if you didn't tell the truth that she was already so certain of, so yes, I lied. First she started mocking me, called me names like a childhood bully, not a grown woman with 4 kids, weirdo, klutz, idiot, etc., all in a malicious or caustic tone, so I knew it wasn't playing around. If I cried I was scolded because I wasn't bleeding. I learned to hide when I couldn't hold back the tears. Then she escalated it to threatening to send me to a home for troubled kids. If I was sent away it would almost certainly mean she would get rid of my dog, my only friend from ages 10 to 15, and anything else I owned that she liked to take away to punish me. The threat terrified me so much that I would panic, and I guess that scared her off using it anymore. To give her the benefit of the doubt, she has been dealing with mental issues for basically my entire life. I'm sure if she'd been in the right mind a lot of this wouldn't have happened. but it did, and even though I'm 26 years old now, I'm still dealing with the repercussions. I thought it was normal to fill your mouth with spice when you swore. I figured some people used soap, some used extremely hot spices to teach the lesson. It wasn't until I was older and mentioned like shoving your mouth full of cayenne pepper and was met with a mix of blank and horrified stares that I realized it was faked up. The other faked up one from my parents was when they were disciplining my brother. My brother is an actual sociopath. I've written about him before. When they went through different therapists, no one knew how to treat him, so they kept coming home with new ways to parent. One was teaching him how his actions affect other people. For example, if he ate and wasted food from the fridge, I was denied dinner. If he stole something from me, I wasn't allowed to have it back. When he got suspended and expelled, I was grounded. When he molested me, I got punished. Edit. They also turned the lock around on my brother's room to lock him in. While it definitely sets up some abuse red flags, it was done as a safety precaution. At 4 years old he would get out and roam the house stealing shit, like knives, money, credit cards, the cat. They started with a baby gate, but he would easily climb over it. They briefly had 2 baby gates stacked on top of each other, but after he climbed over that, they realized how dangerous it was. To keep him from 3 AM knife shopping and from our sheet getting stolen, they locked him in his room after he'd fall asleep every night. When my wife was growing up, her mom used to threaten her and her brother with things like, "If you don't behave, we'll put you up for adoption." She went as far as to print out adoption paperwork. I have no idea if it was to disown your child or a stack of papers that said adoption in bold black print. She'd also take my brother-in-law's pup and freeze it, telling him she'd force him to eat it. He had a habit of smearing sheet on the walls. Yes, it's a sign of abuse, and that's how she tried to get him to stop. I don't know if it ever happened. I also know that she threatened to burn his video game systems all the time. Even burned a game or two to show she was serious. Worst part was he bought all the games with money he saved up, or received them as Christmas gifts. I don't think he ever got any from his parents, because for a long time, they just did Christmas tree ornaments. Knowing him now, though, I'd guess she did way more to him than I know about. Well, someone did. He's had irrational anger issues forever. He has terrible impulse control, especially when it comes to sexual things. He's very guarded. He also hasn't slept in his bedroom since my wife moved out and went to school 7 years ago. Her mom would also humiliate them by bringing up bad things they had done recently every time their extended family got together. They just realized this was messed up when my wife started telling me about it this winter, when her mom flaked out for a week. Took a few days to even know where she was. She hadn't been hiding it either. She just thought it was normal, even though it was something she said she had always told herself she'd never do to her kids. My mom essentially expected me to tell her everything. Her being pissed at anyone meant she'd come yell at me about it, not in a blame way, in a she can maintain adult friendships and wants to rant about my dad not doing enough around the house way. Oh, also she has been a stay-at-home mom my entire life. My dad and I cooked and did the dishes. Me and my brother did our own laundry. My dad took care of the dog in the mornings, our plus walk before work, and feeding him. And my dad mowed the lawn. My brother would open the curtains in the morning, and my mom would usually walk the dog in the evenings. Pretty much all of us would feed him. Pretty sure he got like 3 meals on occasion, because we all thought the others forgot. And she'd frequently come yell at me while I was trying to do my HW, because there was 4 or 5 things in a pile of what was otherwise other people's mess. I'd be screamed at and called a disappointment for getting any C's. I was taking all college level classes starting junior year. She'd call me fat and shame me anytime she saw me eating junk food. She'd also consistently buy junk food while doing the same to everyone else, including the dog and herself. She essentially was constantly on a health kick and would be pissed when we wouldn't all join her on her no carb diet. I have more and none of it is really bad, but it seriously messed me up socially. On mobile, mom would often emotionally manipulate me and overreact to what felt like everything. Example, was being woken up for school in an extremely obnoxious way like usual, lights on, mom yelling, pulling me out of bed by my leg. So in my frustration 5-year-old me yells, "I hate living here." Bad move. Was told to get dressed and take myself to school. Over a 2-hour walk, maybe 15-minute drive. I'm crying and apologizing the whole time, but I'm told nope, you're not a part of this family anymore. Go to school and don't come back home. I'm beside myself with tears, thinking I'm never going to see my brothers or dad again, and that they all hate me. She slams the door behind me and locks it. She lets me get to the highway by myself before pulling up and asking me if I would ever say that again, and how dare I purposefully hurt her feelings like this. After apologizing and promising never to say it again, she took me to school, told me to lie to the teachers and tell them our car had problems and that's why I'm late. I did, because I was scared of being kicked out again. Probably should mention she also used to tell me that strange men kidnap and hurt/kill little girls like me, and that I should never walk anywhere by myself or go play outside without an adult. So my anxiety of being alone with no adults had me in full panic because I thought I was going to die. Remembered this incident years later as an adult and realized the emotional abuse started way earlier than I initially thought. Parents refused to get me medical treatment I needed. Well, any really, including refusing to schedule an appointment to have my braces removed, so they sat on my teeth and rotted out for an extra year for no reason. If I wanted, or needed, to see the doctor, my mother would work herself up into a massive screaming argument about how I'm not sick, I'm just doing this to hurt her. She even did it when I was like 7 and dying from a very bad infection in one of my organs that turned into an incredibly high fever. When we had to see family doctors, military family there was more than one occasion where the doctor would lock us in the room and scream at my mother for letting my health conditions get so bad that at some points I almost died, and that no loving mother would leave their child to die like that. I was banned from returning to school unless I saw developmental therapists once or twice too, because the teachers were so concerned that I might be retarded, learning disabilities LMAO. There was other abuse, like her habit of randomly walking in on me doing dishes or something, and she'd just start smashing them and screaming wordlessly, but the medical stuff definitely was the worst of it. Weirdest part is that we live in a country with really good universal healthcare, and she never lived in any country that didn't have it, or refused to go to the doctor for herself, but anytime I did suddenly I was killing her, and was a spiteful little shit hellbent on hurting her for being sick. At first my father used to beat the crap out of me with a leather belt. Then he got in trouble for that because he was pain in the side to the principal of my school because of a side story of me getting bullied, and so he had to stop. He did, most likely because he didn't want to lose my younger sisters. However, when he couldn't hurt me physically, he was not allowed to use tools and his royal hand would hurt to use. He started shouting at me for literally anything he didn't like. He also cut me off from the outside world completely if I didn't please his expectations. He would try to force me to be something he could control. Whenever I tried to stand up for myself, he would beat the shit out of me. I thought on countless occasions of killing myself to finally end the pain this would cause. I became really good at hiding the pain, becoming the person who tried to be fun to be around, only breaking down when there was nobody else around. I tried many things trying to feel even the slightest amount of joy, only to find out none of it works. Every day I had to go back there. The worst part is I still haven't managed to get away from them, as I have no money and no account that I can't still get. And whenever I'm forced to interact with a child I see his behavior, and even though I try, I'm literally the same. When living with my father I was regularly subjected to physical discipline. If he didn't like something I did, or if I refused to do something, the go-to was always a pop in the face, or on the back of the head, with lots of yelling and intimidation. I thought that's just how dads were when I was real young, because to be fair, that was the stereotype dads use force to discipline. By the time I was 11 or so, I had had enough. I remember very clearly the first time he popped me in the back of the head, and I turned around and slammed my fist into his chest as hard as I could. Dude was 3x my size, so it was totally pointless, but I was just our age from that point on. It made it worse, of course, and after a few incidents like this the whole thing devolved into full-blown fist fights between A grown man and a preteen boy. I kicked him in the balls once to even the playing field. Looking back, I'm certain he was holding back. He could have broken me in half, but after that first time I never once gave an inch. He knew he was going to have to literally fight me. If he wanted to lay a hand on me, I wouldn't stop swinging back until I had hit him once for every single slap or strike he delivered to me. I counted them. After I went to school the first time with a black eye, all that came to an end though when I realized that the outside world absolutely does not tolerate that kind of thing. I immediately realized I had the upper hand and I played the victim so hard. I was hoping I could get him arrested, but it never went that far. Haven't seen the guy since. My mom is a helicopter parent. Even as a 26-year-old adult, she took control all aspects of my life because of fear and control more than love. Her view of love was somewhat twisted. She also gave me a hard slap in the smallest infraction. In the end, before her death, we became estranged. The worst she did was took my passport away so I could not leave and controlled my finances, read all my emails during the height of me threatening to leave home. I found out later as a young child she was the receiving end of a harsher discipline. She was the eldest of 9 siblings and was expected to be their secondary mother and breadwinner growing up. Her grandma was an authoritarian and one time smacked her in the head with a cast iron skillet. She still grew up smart, respected and beautiful, but grew cold and unemotional because she had to be the strong one in the family. Before she had me, she worked next to an abortion clinic, saw kids as young as 12 going in for procedures. Then when she had me, I was such a sickly thing that doctors though I wouldn't come to term. All that fear made her so possessive of me that she didn't realize till the end that she suffocated me when I really wanted was more affection from her. On a dark humor side, my mom watches too many soap operas, both US and Spanish ones. She tends to slap like the evil villain of a TV show and even gets the pose correct. On some positive note, some of the slaps I got were well deserved. I did some shitty things as a kid/preteen. This'll probably get buried, but this wasn't really a punishment, but it sure felt like one. My mom has severe depression. When I was growing up, she was medicated, but at one point her meds just stopped working. If you've never been on antidepressants, they trial you on new ones to see what works, but it takes like 6 months per trial and sometimes they don't work. My mom went through a few different drugs, and then her parents died, and it was a faking mess. So from 12 to 17 or so I was kind of on my own. When her parents died, they just left us for 2 weeks. By that point I was packing lunches for myself and my brother. I was kind of feeding myself dinners. Sometimes my brother too. I was working an after school job and money got tight somehow, so I ended up paying for a few big grocery trips. She barely left her bed for a few years in the middle. I didn't see a doctor or a dentist for years. We had health insurance. I never got vaccinated for meningitis because she just couldn't. It sucked. I got pneumonia at one point and it took way too long to get me to the faking doctor. I was just soldiering through with cough medicine and hope until I found I couldn't breathe walking up the hill to school and my fever was 102. That shit's neglect. Just because there was a really good reason for it doesn't mean it wasn't neglect. The worst of it was when her meds finally got right and she came back to being a person. She tried to be a mom to 17-year-old me and I wasn't having it. We fought all the time. It got so bad that I moved in with my dad. They divorced when I was 7 for the summer after I graduated high school. Hetero man. Not abuse by my own reasonable standards, but I have some funny stories. My mom once lost her shit and actually put that green dishwashing soap in my mouth for calling her a cunt at the age of like 7. Faking hell. That tasted like shit. I didn't learn anything though. She'd lose her shit and slap me around a couple of times. I didn't learn anything. She used to spank me as a little boy, but I never learned anything. I was wild, and my dad just straight up told my mom, if he even beat me or my sister again, he would personally beat the shit out to her. It more or less worked. Not that I seemed to care though. My dad would occasionally lose his shit on me too when I treated my sister like shit all the time. She hated her childhood cause of me. And he'd give me a little, but painful, whack on the head and tell me to be nice to my little sister. It actually worked. I listened when my dad spoke, because he never got angry when he did it, just disappointed, unlike my mom who would scream at me that she didn't love me or wished she never had me. One time I was acting like a proper monkey and he subsequently broke a faking TV remote over my head. The thing went up in 1,000 pieces and it really hurt. I got annoyed and got a bump on my head. I could tell he didn't mean it and felt bad afterwards, so it's all good. I deserved it too, man. One time I was throwing food at my sister while eating at the table, so my dad just went, "Fuck it. You want a food fight? You'll get a food fight," and threw a whole tomato at my face, so it splattered all over my face. I just looked stunned, and then my dad smiled, and I almost fell to the ground laughing, and then we all had a good spirited food fight. It's actually a great memory for me and my sister. That was a good day to be a kid. We got to do a food fight. Looking back, man, some of this shit can now be considered child abuse by contemporary Norwegian law, but I deserved it, and arguably learned at least something from it. I wouldn't change it even if I could. Good memories, honestly, haha. When I say deserved it, I really mean I deserved it. I mean I was really faking mean as a kid. I called my mom a hoe, bitch and a cunt when I was like 7 to 8 years old. And bullied my sister every single day, beat her up, manipulated her by pretending to wanna play, then throwing her dolls out of the windows, etc. I took great pleasure in seeing her upset. My sister says to this day that I made her life a living hell as a kid, and she still has issues stemming from that. I regret that. I generally don't feel bad when hurting people, but I do feel bad for hurting my sister and calling my mom horrible words. I didn't back then though. My dad would throw my brother, sister, and me against walls if we looked at him funny sometimes. He's also dragged us up the stairs by our ankles for that kind of thing too. I found out these were wrong when I was talking with his mother and thought it was funny that he got angry at my sister for not knowing the answer to a math problem and flipped the table that had his own laptop on it. She was really pissed off, and I immediately felt guilty about letting that news slip. Later on, my parents found out I had depression and anorexia and basically locked me away inside the house at 16. I had no internet or phone privileges for the first year, sneaked letters to friends, and when I got the internet back for schoolwork at 17, it was monitored and blocked. I spent all my time drawing and watching the shows my little brothers and sisters watched out of complete boredom, and I'd constantly be reminded that I was ruining the family and I was faked in the head, and no one wanted to talk to me because the anorexia had taken away my ability to think straight in any scenario. Moved out the day after my 18th and life is absolutely a million times better. They have 9 kids living with them right now, and I have no idea if they still act like this. Goddamn fundamental Catholic nutters. I also apparently needed an exorcism for my mental health. The priest said no. So my father works for the government. He's always had a very hard time separating work life from home life. He ran our household very strict. And the one time I decided to tell someone about the shit he was pulling, he made me instantly regret it. I was the black sheep of the family and got everything the worst out of all my siblings. It didn't help that my mother didn't have a backbone and let him get away with everything. There were hours I spent in a corner spelling my last name out loud at 5 years old for punishment. I spent countless days locked in my bedroom. They wouldn't even let me out to pee, but punished me even harder when I peed on the floor. I was grounded for a year straight at 10 years old. I wasn't allowed to come out of my bedroom until noon, even though all of my siblings were up and already downstairs playing. Anytime my parents took me out anyway, he used it as a chance to publicly humiliate me, and he'd tie me down to a bed if I was crying as a way to humiliate me. Honestly, I used to feel a lot of hatred towards him, but as I got older all I feel is pity, because clearly he is faked up. He always told me I'd never amount to anything. Publicly, of course, and now I just sit back and laugh because I have my master's degree, I'm engaged, own my own house, and have a fantastic job, all while he's on his 3rd wife with 8 children, all of whom he has to pay child support for many years to come. My dad would hit us pretty often, sometimes with a belt. Once he beat the hell out of me up at the pasture in an attempt to make me angry, so I would be able to get mad enough to hurt other kids when sparring. I just ended up hurting other kids, so he wouldn't hurt me again. I'm pretty sure I killed the passion for martial arts in a few kids, because who wants to keep trying when that crazy girl frantically stomped your face in 3 times in a row? I feel pretty bad about that. When he and my mom split, he drained their joint account, so she had to choose between feeding us and making rent. She paid for the rent, then begged around the neighborhood for food until she got a new account. He was trying to starve her, and us, by extension, out, so we had to go back. He also moved out a bunch of times prior to the divorce, once for almost 2 years. My mom asked the school if they had any male teachers, so I could finally have a positive male authority figure in my life. Mr. Page, if you ever read this, you were awesome. I use some of the things you taught me to get my own kids to learn new things and how to behave. I couldn't put into words then how much of a difference you made, and I honestly don't think I can now, but thank you. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. My dad would beat my brother and I over complete bullshit, because I didn't realize, until I was older, that he was an alcoholic, and his rage would increase when he'd drink. One time he sent me to my room for talking back at dinner, and I just sat in my bed crying. He came up and pulled me out of bed by my hair, dragged me downstairs and beat me. He beat the shit out of my younger brother once, who had really bad abs, because apparently us playing pretend that we were Pokemon trainers and laughing in my brother's room somehow was annoying, and I just sat and cried in my room while having to listen to my brother getting smacked. When I was a teenager and realized that this wasn't just normal spankings kids got in the 90s for misbehaving, I started to call him out for being violent. One time I was trying to leave my house after a nasty argument, and he grabbed my purse and broke the handle. It was a super cool bag that looked like a mini boombox that you could plug your iPod into and play music through its speakers, so I was pissed, and then slammed me against the front door and kicked me. He also cut the landline in my room with scissors when I was in high school, so I couldn't log onto the internet after they went to bed. Dial up. Also, when I was really young, maybe 4 to 5, I told my grandparents, my mom's parents, I thought my dad was going to kill me because I didn't understand what abuse was. They told my parents and my dad cried, but it didn't stop until I moved out. My mom has bad anxiety and would usually just stay in another room, then yelled for him to stop after a certain point. But she rarely ever saw what went on first, and both of them deny what happened to my brother and I, and always say we just exaggerated it. He quit drinking a year or so ago, but now just takes a combo of prescription uppers and downers that I have no idea why the doctor prescribed them together, as well as antidepressants. And would steal my brother's ad meds when he lived at home for a bit after college. Luckily my brother turned out to be an amazingly caring and successful person, and I'm doing pretty well despite dealing with bad depression/anxiety/PTSD from the abuse and another semi-recent accident that caused me some pretty bad physical injuries. And I want to quit drinking because I know I do it too often and don't want to go down the same road as him. I can't fathom how a grown man or woman could beat a defenseless child and live with themselves. I'm posting on a throwaway because I don't want this finding me, because I know they'll never acknowledge what happened, and I love my mom and don't want to hurt her or cause her more anxiety. My dad had mentioned to me several times, I know where you sleep, and I know where you keep your baseball bat. I hope you don't plan on using your knees. Those words haunt me to this day. He also once joke slammed my sister through a wall because she was getting visibly angry at something she was getting punished for that she never did, that my mom lied about. Then he made her repair the wall she broke through. My mom was the worst gaslighter on the planet, and she was also a compulsive liar. She used to go around and make up stories about my sister and I that were so off the wall and stupid. My dad always believed it and would beat the shit out of us for it. Mom would beat the shit out of us as well, often for literally no reason, and then lie to dad about what we had done. When I was in middle school I had eventually had enough, and I told them that I was going to tell the school counselors. My mom said to me, "Do you realize I work for the court system? I know plenty of people who'd love to lock you up." I was a really good kid, never got in trouble, on a roll and everything. I lived in constant fear of angering my parents, but that didn't stop them one bit. It was always hard to blame my dad because he was under the spell of my mom. When my sister moved out, I just got double the lies and devotion from my mother. My dad had lived his whole life thinking that my sister and I were terrible kids and young adults. But it wasn't until I moved out, 10 years after my sister, that my mom had no one to blame. As paradoxical as it sounds, my mom would do things and try to convince my dad that he did them. For instance, break furniture, say things he didn't say. My dad then had a moment of clarity and realized what had been going on for so long, literally 28 years, and then I sat down and talked to him about it. I remember waking up in the mornings hearing crashes because my mom would drop something in the bathroom or kitchen. I always hoped it would finally be the thing that killed my mother. It's hard to love my dad after feeling nothing for either of my parents for the majority of my life. But we are working on it, and it's getting better. Edit, added a couple more things, and updated my relationship with my dad. My dad would get mad over something trivial and come into my room and literally throw everything I owned on the floor. I'm talking completely trashing the room. He would ground me for entire summers and spend the whole summer either screaming at me or pretending I didn't exist to get under my skin. He constantly verbally abused all 6 of my siblings, but as the oldest and the only one in the house not blood related to anyone, I got it the worst. The worst thing I can think of that has stuck with me, and this seems trivial, but at the time hurt badly, was when he found out I didn't go to tutorials before school that morning, because my tutor was also a coach, and they had athletics. He thought I just blew it off. He was quiet when I got home, and I knew he knew I didn't go. We were eating taco bueno. I was across the table from him. He would glare at me, and I avoided eye contact each time. Out of nowhere he stood up and pelted a burrito at my face. I remember it hitting my glasses and smashing all over my face and hair. I was so humiliated because it was in front of my siblings. I ran upstairs to shower and bawled. My stepmom came home right after that, and she walked into the aftermath of him throwing a tantrum and said I was upstairs. She knew very well and saw that he was abusive, and she was complicit the whole time. She came upstairs and asked me if I was okay, and I quietly, through tears, asked her to please stand up to him or help me, because this shit was a daily occurrence. She never did. Nobody ever did. Haven't spoken to him in 5 years. I didn't think things like getting hit with a belt or smacked were abnormal, but there were some things that all the parental figures in my life, parents and their partners, have done that are considered abusive. When I was younger, my dad's girlfriend got angry for interrupting her while she was talking to my brother. We were at the dinner table. She grabbed my hair, threw me onto the floor, and dragged me by the hair from the kitchen into the dining room. Me and my brother shared a bunk bed that was in there. We didn't have a bedroom. She then threw me onto the bottom bunk and then hit me on my ass repeatedly. We didn't realize till after she told me to strip and clean up in the bathroom that my face hit the metal frame of the bunk bed, which gave me a black eye and a busted lip, and that my back was scratched after being dragged across a nail sticking out of the floor. I was maybe 8 at the time, and I lied about it for 3 years. She'd also throw things like books and call me stuff like pig or disgusting. Learning about the abuse she went through when she was younger, I can understand why she behaved the way she did, so I forgive her, but I won't be friendly with her. She my one sister's mom, so I occasionally run into her. My mom didn't do very much beyond just being kind of strict, but there is the one time I was feeling very distressed and crying, and I didn't feel like talking about it. She got angry and said, "You know what? When you commit suicide, I don't care. I'm not going to your funeral." This was around the time when my self-harming was very bad and depression was severe, and I know she didn't know how to handle something like that. I didn't like her for a while after that, but I forgave her because of the situation she was thrown into. She also never did anything else to really hurt me. My dad was just kind of rough when he got angry. I was arguing with his girlfriend the one time, the one mentioned above, and told her I hated her. He then grabbed me, threw me onto the couch, and held me down while screaming in my face. It happened a long time ago, and I don't remember what he was saying. The worst one, my mom's ex-boyfriend and one of my brother's dad, was sexually abusive to me as well as physically abusive to me and my brother, the one that wasn't his kid. It all started at a very young age, maybe around 4ish, and didn't stop till around 12, so being touched and watched and seeing things from him that I wasn't supposed to see seemed like a normal thing. He'd also leave bruises on my younger brother from beating him. I don't remember thinking that other people also experience these things, but I didn't think anything he was doing was wrong for a long time. Creepy and uncomfortable, yes, but not wrong. I guess I likened it to getting hit with the belt for doing something bad. His is the worst, because it's had the most impact on my life. Not so much a punishment, but I finally realized we weren't like other kids when we moved on to an Air Force base in Florida. The neighbor girl came over while we were on our back porch. Turns out she was the same age as my younger sister and was in the same grade, so we had questions about the school, etc. After talking a while, she said she was actually headed to the marina store about a mile or two away and asked if we wanted to go with her. We declined because, well, we couldn't. So she asked if we wanted to come over to her house. Again, we couldn't. She then asked if we wanted to play badminton in her backyard. No fence between the yards. And again, we couldn't. The truth of the matter was we were not allowed off the porch until after lunch. Something about there possibly still being dew on the ground in August in Florida. That could cause us to catch a cold. Through the whole hour-long conversation with this girl, my sister and I played nervously with cars, running them back and forth on the porch. Why? Because if our stepmother had looked out the window and seen us not playing, we may have gotten a spanking. It was in that moment I knew we weren't being treated right. I was 2 months away from being 15 years old. I'm 18, and everyone told me I was a good kid growing up and still am. I never really did things that warranted major punishment. Despite this, my parents beat me quite a bit from 4 to 12. I'm not sure why it stopped tbh, because both of my parents have very aggressive personalities whereas I don't. I'm pretty sure I used to get anxiety attacks waiting for my dad to come home to dole out punishment. It doesn't help that my dad is 6 feet 5 inches 250 pounds. One time I got my grade lowered from a 95 to an 85 in math. Got a beating for that. I think my parents stopped when I stopped being scared of that. The last time my dad threatened to beat me was 7th grade. I don't remember what we were fighting about, but we were fighting over something. Then he threatened to escalate drastically and beat me with a cricket bat. I was shocked, but then I got mad. In my head at the time I remember thinking, do it, and I swear I will call CPS so fast. And my mom would sometimes stop him from going too far. Boom, and she didn't say anything this time. I just glared at him, and then he huffed and put the bat down.